Greetings. I'm Evan Swenson. I'm an author and a book publisher. I'm also the developer of Author Masterminds, sponsors of Readers and Writers Book Club. Welcome to Readers and Writers Book Club. You're invited to come along with us as we visit with and learn more about the amazing Author Mastermind authors. Today, we'll be talking with the Author Masterminds author, Carl Douglas, neurosurgeon turned author, writes with gripping realism. We'll be talking with Carl about how he became a published author of 27 books, including Gog and Magog. Good afternoon, Carl. Thanks for joining us on Readers and Writers Book Club. So, Carl, let's start out here today. So here's we're going to have a drawing today for some prizes for those who are attending this Readers and Writers Book Club live event. And so for those that came on time, we're going to start out by offering this a prize. So today we're going to have the prize is going to be the Publication Consultant's hat. There's only 10 of those hats in the world. There's the old logo of Readers and Writers, or of Publication Consultants. And so there are only 10 of these, but today we're going to draw for one of those. And so we'll have two of them. So there are going to be two people in the whole world that'll have one of these hats. So Los, who have we got that we could give one of these to today? Who's here today that we could, let's make a drawing for these. Okay, let me get one of these. Okay, here we go. Tyler Ellison. Tyler Ellison, you are the winner of this hat. So what I need you to do is send us an email. Send the email to evan@publicationconsultants.com. And then we'll with your address, and we'll send you one of these hats. So let's see. But let's go on then. Tyler, thanks for coming to the event today. It's a pleasure for us to have you here today. So as Carl, as I reviewed your bio information and consider your writing achievements, there's plenty of evidence of why you were selected to be an Author Mastermind member. Now, if I have this right, Carl, until you wrote your first book, you were Carl Douglas, but after you wrote your first book, you were Carl Douglas, but prior to that, you were somebody else. Why did you decide to publish Last Phoenix, your first book, under a pen name?
Because I knew that I was going to write the saga of a neurosurgeon. And when I wrote that, I needed to protect the names and places of the guilty. So I decided to start out with a pseudonym for the original book, Last Phoenix. That problem is now moot since the most of those guilty persons have now passed on to their rewards and it doesn't matter anymore.
Okay, that was the next question. You answered it right up front. I noticed in your bio, someplace I read where it says that you adopted a pen name to protect the guilty or innocent. You didn't want it to reflect badly on them. So from one of your books, tell us one of those experiences that you were trying to protect the guilty.
Oh, in Saga of a Neurosurgeon, I told about my early general surgery residency and internship. And the first day I went, we did an operation in which we lost 110 units of blood. And because I was just a thing, an intern, wasn't allowed to leave the room. That's one. The second, and one that I would not have wanted to be exposed, was that we put a beautiful 17-year-old girl with relatively mild aortic stenosis on the table, put her on bypass, and prepared her for the surgery. But the surgeon never showed. He waited for nearly 12 hours, and since he was such an autocrat, we had to stay there. The anesthesiologist begged us to get on with it, close the chest or whatever. I had no say, but that ended up killing that girl. We never could get her off the bypass. And I have that story in there, and I'm not going to share the name. I will share a result. He did it again when he moved to another place. This is all within academia. He was caught and suffered all the consequences that you can imagine, except going to prison. And he came a hair's breadth from that because of tax evasion. So when I talk about the guilty, that guy is the poster boy.
Wow. Now, I trust that that's not what we could all look forward to if we went to the hospital. That's probably a rarity, no. Carl? Is that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. Yes. The monitoring now, even for the grandees of surgery, is so strict that those things are rare as hen's teeth. Not impossible, but extremely rare. And hallelujah.
Carl, one of your fans, I guess, someone that's read your book, Gog and Magog. Let's see, who is this? This is Rich. One of your readers, one of your ideal readers, Rich, asked the questions, what primary research techniques did you employ when writing Gog and Magog? There had to be a lot of research in that, Carl.
That's true. I purchased and went to the library for a significant number of books, read them. I also spent time talking to friends in the diplomatic corps and in the military, so that I'd get the jargon right, I'd get the dates and places right, excuse me, and so that I could get the sense of the politics which lay behind this saga of Gog and Magog. That Gog and Magog meaning basically the end of the world.
So Gog and Magog, I know that people have asked what that title means, and the subtitle's got some words in I can't pronounce and don't know what they mean. So tell me about that.
Gog and Magog is biblical, Old Testament. Those are the armies of the last days, and the great battle that takes place on the same plain where David fought Goliath. It is hellfire and brimstone and all manner of terrible things which will attend the end of the earth. And I think you'll find as you read this book that that's pretty much the case. And I'm hoping that you'll find getting to that hellfire and damnation, Gog and Magog, day of judgment, will be plausible. Not happy, plausible.
Okay, Carl, I got a note here. Thanks. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. We've got a note here that we're having trouble with sound Lois, is that universal or just with this one viewer? Just one. Okay. Well, Marianne, we're sorry that you can't have sound, that you only see just one image here. But we're sorry about that. But I suspect everyone else then has sound. So that's, we're sorry about that. So, Carl, from in your Gog and Magog, there's a quote from Gog and Magog that describes some thinking that the enemies have, taken from the book The Lion in Winter by James Goldsmith. And I remember the movie of that. I didn't read the book, but I saw the movie, and I remember the scene that that they were talking about, comparing where the old experienced king is talking to the inexperienced one that's trying to resolve the problem. You remember? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. That is an epigram for what goes on in the book. You will understand the book better if you understand and know about that. Let me just share a little bit with you.
Okay.
First of all, it involves the elderly, wise, cruel, and crafty king of France, Philip II, and the cunning but young and inexperienced Henry II of Great Britain. Philip, the English, perceived that their conversation was proceeding very nicely. I'm sorry, Henry did, because he was giving all kinds of information to convince King Philip that the fight against the British would be futile. But this is what the King of France said as he got up to walk away. "You have burbled every bit of strategy you've got. I know exactly what you will do and exactly what you won't. And I have told you exactly nothing. To these aged eyes, boy, that's what winning looks like. Dormez bien, sleep well." And that is kind of the essence of the conflict and the secret betrayal between the jihadists and the naive president of the United States, who wishes to have peace on earth and to get the Nobel Peace Prize and to be known forever as the great president who ended all wars. The title of the book, Gog and Magog, tells you something about how well he fared.
Now, what about the subtitle there, Carl?
The lower part is, and I probably butcher the
You want to show us the cover of that book? Have you got that there, Carl?
Yeah.
Okay,
I do.
Let's look at it. All right.
Now, it's better probably for you to read that. That's Arabic, and it just says the same thing. It's just talking about the end of the world and the great battle. And then from Revelations, it's the day of judgment.
And so we have a question from a reader, Carl.
Yeah, no. What's the question?
So I don't know who asked this question. Did we? Pardon? Oh, a follow-up from Rich. He says, he asked this, oh yeah, okay, Carl. Is the horrific incidents at the big tent in the desert based on actual events, or is that, oh, well, that's the question. So then I'll just ask further question, or is that just fiction of Carl?
That's fiction whole cloth. Made it up all out of my head.
Okay, Rich, there you have the answer. And it shows also the writing ability of author mastermind author Carl Douglas. Carl, one of the first books that you published, well, the first book was Last Phoenix. And then another one came along, it was the All in Jest. And one of the things from the description of All in Jest, it says, this work of autofiction gives a unique insight and perspective into the complex and emotionally charged world of medical malpractice. So a couple of things here. Autofiction. What do you mean by autofiction? That automatic fiction, or what is that?
No, autobiographical.
Oh, okay. So this is this.
So it's a mixture of
This book can't be about you, however, because the main character in there's a woman.
Yeah, that'd make it difficult. That's true. Talk about trying to protect the guilty here. Let me tell you, though, something about this. Much of this book, much of the dialogue of the book, especially the courtroom scenes, is verbatim from courtroom transcripts and from deposition transcripts, which happened to me. This is why I moved out of California. This case, the main thing, dragged on for years, and the scene of, or the scenes, because it took 5 days, of testimony were gripping realism. I lost 15 pounds. It was
amazing.
It was a truly terrible experience, but a very interesting one. It was a royal joust, parry and thrust, and I learned a great deal about courtrooms and about medical malpractice. Interestingly, the opposing attorney had just gotten out of prison for having committed vehicular homicide, so he was a little touchy. The jury, interestingly enough, was in an area which where the people served at the skunk works in Area 51. So when they were going through voir dire, they were asked, well, what is your occupation? And 12 out of 14 said, I can't say. And the plaintiff's attorney would insist, and the judge said, finally, none of these people can say that. Everybody works in secret here, and I'll attest for them. Just go on to the next question.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh. Well, I've enjoyed that book, by the way, Carl.
It's kind of fun. I'll tell you, the last part, I hope you'll realize, is not autofiction. It's just fiction, but it was a way of venting. I was able to get back at the guy without actually doing harm and going to prison myself.
So you got even in the book, even though you didn't get even in real life. This is the detectives aren't going to come and read the book and come and get you then.
They're not. And he has a copy. I sent him one.
Oh, did you get any response from him?
No, we don't speak anymore.
Carl, we have a question from Victoria, but I want to put that question on hold for just a moment. And I'm going to ask Lois, have we got the list of people that we could put in a drawing, or has that gone away for us? I don't see it. So we're gonna, this is our first live Facebook Live broadcast, everyone. So we're going to make some mistakes, and it's going to be better next time. One of the things that we didn't do is we didn't figure out how we're going to get the names so that we could give you a prize. So this is the exception that we're going to come back to. Next time we'll have it right. But this time, if you want to win one of these, one of 10 only, real nice publication consultants shirts. They're not a t-shirt, they're a real shirt. If you'd like to win one, if you'll send me an email, we'll put your name in the hat and we'll draw your name out. Okay? So send me an email and that evan@publicationconsultants.com. We'll put your name in the hat and we'll draw it out. And if you're winning, we'll send you one of those shirts. So send the email and put in it shirt drawing number 1, because we're going to have shirt drawing number 2. So if you want to be eligible for the shirt drawing number 1, evan@publicationconsultants.com, shirt drawing number 1. Okay. And then we'll send you a shirt if you're the winner. So Victoria, we're going to still put your question on hold for just a minute because I want to find out a little bit more about Carl Douglas, and we'll come back to his books in a few minutes. So Carl, you grew up in a really small town in, is it Utah? I can't remember whether it was Nevada or Utah.
It's in Utah, but it is the second driest state in the Union.
Okay.
It was real small. At that point in time, there were only 5,000 people in the county. It was on a gridiron, which had 6 blocks on each side of Center Street, with 6th Street being the edge of town, and 3rd Street was the last paved street in town. So when we played sandlot, baseball or football or whatever we did, it was on gravel. You had to grow up to be tough.
Speaking of tough, Carl, I have seen photographs of you teaching martial arts. Now that's as an adult, not as a child, but as an adult, you were teaching martial arts. And I think that goes back to your youth, does it not? Where you learned that? You learned that for self-protection, or what was the deal? Talk to us about that.
Well, I did learn it for self-protection. I sent back. In those days, we didn't have the internet, so I sent back to Clint, K-L-I-N-T, Clint, Texas. And I got a book on boxing and one on judo. So I learned a little bit out of that. And the reason I learned that was my dad was the town doctor, county doctor, the only one. And that made every kid that I knew presume that I was rich. Well, that was the worst thing you could do, unless being effeminate. And that would be the worst of the worst. So I used to go home and then I would have 4 or 5 guys, same guys every day, and they would set upon me and they would start to beat me up. Now, you have to understand, this is in the days where big boys don't cry. So I got my nose broke twice, and I got black eyes regularly, and I got all skinned up. And I would come home and lie to my mother, and my dad would smile, and she would say, "Well, I hope you haven't been in any fights." And he'd say, "He'll learn how to take care of himself. Got to toughen up." So I decided I'd toughen up. And after a while, just to make a long story short, they didn't bother me anymore. And as I got older, I decided I would really study seriously karate and then jiu-jitsu. And I studied under a real master of Brazilian jiu-jitsu named Pedro Sauer. and I learned a great deal. It took me 10 years. So none of those 4-year-olds getting a black belt. This was the real thing. Then I went on and decided I would just teach girls and women because I thought they were the ones most vulnerable to violence. And the idea was learn to protect yourself and no daintiness about it. So if they're going to attack you and only one of you is going to go home, it's going to be you, girl. So that was the idea.
Yeah, the more I learn about you, Carl, the more amazed I am of the things you do and where you've been and what you've done. Now, in your first book of the saga of a neurosurgeon, I think there's 6 volumes to that book. The first one,
Right.
I recall, shows a young man on top of another young man and pounding on him. Tell us about that. Is that what did you call that? I get back here again. Autobiographical? Autofiction?
Autofiction.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. The story in that particular book is called The Young Coyote, and that's kind of what I was. Or, as they say in the East, it's a young coyote. But anyway, in The Young Coyote, this 10-year-old is introduced into the town. Every boy has got to get in with it. There was a lot of tough kids who played football out in the gravel. And they decided because he was new and he was a teacher's boy, he must be effeminate and weak and a pretty boy, a sissy. So they decided to do all kinds of mean things, like in tackles he got beat on. And then finally the worm turned and he beat the crap out of this one biggest boy. In fact, he selected the biggest boy to make his point, and he made the big boy cry. I had several such experiences, which led to the time when nobody did that to me anymore. And so, yeah, that's auto, small letters, fiction. There's another thing in that book that you might not believe in that chapter, but about putting a cop car on jacks and then racing by in another car and having the cop car spin its wheels and fall off its jack and as I recall, break an axle. Fortunately, we got well out of town and hid in the hills for over a day. So protecting the guilty was rather personal then.
Yeah, you was protecting the guilty.
Yeah, they made me do it.
Yeah. It reminds me of the story that I heard, Carl, that says that the 10-year-old boy, like you, came home from school one day and his mother asked him, now, what did mommy's little boy learn in school today? And the kid responded, I learned a couple of kids not to call me mommy's little boy. So you learned a couple of kids too, didn't you? So here,
I learned them.
You learned them. We got a couple of other questions. We got questions and follow-up questions and then follow-up questions on the follow-up questions. So let's start with Victoria's question. So Victoria asks about Gog and Magog. Is this story a story of victory or is it a story of defeat? And then...
Yes, both.
It is. It's a story of, well, all stories really are stories of
victory.
victory.
You've got to read the whole thing to understand why the answer to that question is yes. My wife doesn't like the book because it doesn't end the way she hoped it would.
Uh-huh.
But it ended the way it should have.
So then DB asked the question, asking of Victoria then, he says, victory to whom? And so I think you asked it. We're not sure of that?
It also has to include time. Victory when, and what ended up to be the final victory and defeat. War is a terrible thing.
Yeah.
This was a particularly terrible war. And in the end, nobody won. Earlier on, the Allied forces did win, and they won very decisively, but at the cost of much of the earth, a nuclear winter and all that sort of thing.
And that's it. And that's part of Gog and Magog, is this nuclear winter.
Another tagline there could have been "War is hell," because this is a stagey story.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, here's the question, Carl. I see this question, I have to smile about it, because I would have never thought of this, but yet now that the question's asked, maybe this is possible, knowing Carl Douglas. Whose question was this, Lois? Is that just someone just asked this question? Okay, Carl, the question is talking about your karate stuff. It says, is Carl Douglas the original Karate Kid? Now, could that have been you? Are you the original Karate Kid? I don't doubt but what you are now that I get to know you better.
No, I wasn't the Karate Kid. By that time, I was a street brawler and boxer. The karate, judo, and jiu-jitsu came substantially later. When, like during my copious free time as a medical student and as a resident. Okay, Carl. So in one of your books, of the saga of a neurosurgeon, you mention in there that, on the cover of the book, let's start with that. The cover of a book, of one of those books, shows a man going off of the balcony, certainly going to do harm or kill him. And the impression is that someone pushed him off of there. And so in the book, it's got to say something about that. Tell us about that. Well, in the book, it tells the story, which is pretty much what you said. The real story is close to that. What happened was I was broke. I was at Stanford, which is an easy way to get broke. And so I got a job working for the psychology department, and this particular psychologist who happened to have been the head of the department. And he stiffed me. He stiffed me for 4 months of work. And then he had the unmitigated gall to give me a C in the class, even though I had done well, because I protested. So I went to see him, and I gritted my teeth down to the nubbins and explained to him how terrible I thought that was, and that I was going to go to the administration. Well, he didn't like that, and he said a lot of naughty things, and he stomped out. While he was out, I sat on his computer and changed my grade to an A. And parted. And so my official record there is unblemished. Now, that was not enough. So I had to write this book, and I accidentally knocked this professor out. All the story up to that point is true. Then I accidentally knocked him over the side and shed a few crocodile tears as he returned to his maker. And then in the book, I switched universities.
So you got even though you didn't get even. How many more experiences have you had in your life, Carl, where you committed a crime in the book that you would have liked to have done in real life? You got any more of those?
Yeah, well, there's several, like putting the car, the police car up on blocks. But another one in there, a true story, is that several of us guys got together and put a Model T Ford on the top of Hoover Tower. Those who are familiar with Stanford know that that's referred to as Hoover's Last Stand. Anyway, another thing that we did there, which relates to the fighting, is I did not want to be a fraternity boy, partly because I couldn't afford it, and I wanted to be just a GDI. So they had a strange thing that went on there where the pledges would go and commit some kind of a
prank,
atrocity, or some nasty thing, something probably illegal, and no one wanted to be known for. Then they got me to help. Part of the reasons they got me to help was because they had guards there. And I was on the wrestling team at Stanford, and I did know this other stuff. I had a certain skill set, which I used to subdue opponents and convince them that it was better for them to remain supine. And we did all this stuff. I also remained anonymous. We had several of those. And then what happened was the retaliation from the regular fraternity members was that they would come down, grab the pledge and shave a cross on the top of his head and paint it red with some kind of dye paint that didn't go away for years. So there's a lot of FLKs there, funny looking kids on the Stanford campus who had done that. So yeah, those were probably at least serious misdemeanors, maybe a felony or two in there. Well, I don't admit to any of this. This is just sharing among friends here.
So the statute of limitations is gone on those. They're not going to come and get you, Carl.
Okay, so I can go back to being Carl Douglas.
Yeah, you know, you've got a lot of common, it appears, with Rich. Rich says that in his freshman year of college, he learned how to put a car on phone books. And he says it takes 4 guys and 8 phone books to do the same thing that you did. And so Valerie says this, how you couldn't do that today because how many cell phones would it take? You know, you can't find a phone book.
That's right.
So 1970, Rich, LA, California, he says the yellow pages were the best. So it takes 8 yellow page 1970 phone books to put a car so where the wheels will spin and do what you did.
Yeah, I want to tell you that I didn't get off scot-free. They had a punishment system at Stanford, and I got to know it well. They had what they called the court road, which was a railroad. And miscreants were assigned to lay track, formally and officially, just like a railroad, and it was about a mile long. And depending on what was going on in building that, you were either building track or tearing it down or helping to turn the train around so it could go the other way. So I did build a lot of track. I also painted the bicycle racks on the entire campus of Stanford twice. Did a real good job too. And it kept me in school.
Yeah, kept you at school and kept you on the track probably a little bit better.
Yeah, I didn't have to go to the gym though, I got to tell you that.
But you didn't go to jail. Yeah.
I didn't go to jail.
Magdell from South Africa asked the question, Carl. She said, where did you get the idea for Gog and Magog? Where'd that come from?
That's political. Back in that day, I was really tired of the liberals. Being a lib was a bad word. So I wanted to write something nasty about the liberals. And so that's what I did. My anti-hero, in a sense, at least one of them, was the president who was just a weenie, who was like the young King Henry II. He believed everything that the cunning old king told him. He fell under the spell of some brilliant genius Muslim jihadists who put him to sleep. Dormez bien. And so he slept well and just watched the obvious happen under his nose. So anyway, I thought that was kind of what was going to happen, and so I wrote about it.
Okay.
And I had to work at it to make it plausible. If I were writing it now, I might well take the other side. But in that book, you could take either side. It's people making silly mistakes, partly because of self-aggrandizement in the government. People are more concerned about getting reelected than they are about the people. And that was a lot of what I was gnashing my teeth over at that point.
Okay, so Carl, we have some questions for you. I was going to ask something like this, but here someone says, well, there's two questions. One is that on these pranks that you pulled, did you learn your lesson? And it sounds like you learned it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I didn't have a dad to tell me that he would withdraw all my money, but I knew that my career, I wanted to be a doctor more than I wanted to take breaths. And it would be over if I didn't smarten up. So in the last quarter of my freshman year, I only did one, and then I ran and hid and didn't do it anymore. I transferred universities, and I grew up and became a good boy after that. And yes, I learned my lesson probably the easy way. I didn't see the inside of a jail, and I just saw the courtyard.
Now, Carl, you were an officer in the United States Navy, is that right?
Yes, got drafted.
Okay, that was the question. You got drafted. Okay, so now the question is, if you got drafted, how did you get drafted with your record of all these things you'd been pulling? And how did you get to be an officer with all that record? Did they just wipe it out, or what happened?
Didn't have a record.
They just never got to the record.
That's right. I only spent one night in jail ever, and that was and there was no record about that. We were playing Bingham High School. That's where the big Bingham copper mine is. And guys on the other side pulled out, they put razor blades between their fingers, and then they would cut us. And that caused a riot. And in the riot, I got arrested with everybody else, and I got thrown in jail in Park City, spent the night, and then they let us go and told us they hoped we had learned our lesson. And I said, oh, yes, sir, I learned my lesson. No more trouble for me. And then that was after that I went to Stanford. No records. So nobody asked me intimidating questions like that where I might have had to shade the truth a bit.
You know, Carl, isn't it amazing that those kind of experiences that you've had for young people, you obviously made the right decision after you made the mistake, or you would have had a record and your life would have been different. So you,
especially now.
Yeah. So the evidence of where you are is the fact that you did learn your lesson. But we're going to run out of time here in a minute. We wanted to kind of limit this to an hour maximum, Carl, but I wanted to just ask this and have you tell us about it. I know that there was, after you had published, you published 27, and after you published maybe 25 of the 27, you had some serious medical problems that it was questionable in a lot of people's minds that you would even live. And it took about 3 years for you to come back. Tell us about that experience. How did you overcome it, and how did you stay with it, with the problems that you had. I'm familiar with just some of them, but for 3 years you were wiped out and wondering whether you were even going to live or not. What was all that about, Carl?
Well, I'll start from the beginning in a second. But I had an old friend who was 100. And I remember somebody coming up and asking him, what was the secret of living to be 100? And he said, well, I just didn't die. And that's kind of what happened to me. It's a whole complicated thing, but the core issue was I developed benign prostatic hypertrophy, shut off my bladder function, and was treated for that with surgery. The great mistake that was made and the core problem was that they put in Foley catheters, which were made of latex. And I did not know that I was allergic to latex. And after 4 transurethral resections of the prostate, the first surgeon figured it out. So he sent me to the one person in the world who did this other operation, which is a huge one. And I'll just describe it a little. It's to make a new bladder outlet. To have that operation done, and the squeamish among you probably ought to turn your sets off now, but I was put in an upside down crucifix position. My legs splayed apart, and that was to allow blood to run out. And then they got in, couldn't get all the way in, had to take out my pubic bone, and I lost half of my blood volume.
Wow.
And so I was, as we used to say, where I trained for surgery, I was low sick. It took 3 years to get my blood volume back to normal, and I still, my platelets have still not gotten there. Well, anyway,
yeah.
To shorten the story.
Now that, Carl, that was your physical problem. What about your mental problem?
Well, yeah, my elevator didn't. Well, you know, just like I said, I just didn't die. But my elevator didn't go to the top for quite a while. My children really worried because I slurred my words and my vocabulary probably dropped down to 500 words. And I was just stupid. It took a long time to get back. And the fact that we're having this conversation today, I consider an ultimate blessing. And I've now written 4 or 5 books since that time, and the neurons are clicking okay now. But I've had all kinds of problems. I had all sorts of adverse effects. I now have chronic MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and I'm taking antibiotics for life. I had blood clots in my legs and pulmonary emboli. I am now on an anticoagulant for the rest of my life. When I told you that they took out the pubic bone, well, what happened is what you'd expect would happen. My pelvis became absolutely unstable. So I ended up having 3 operations to have that done. They got infected because I had metal in me, took them out, and I was given antibiotics that gave me C. diff, Clostridium difficile, which is when you kill all the bacterial genome in the gut, the last bug standing is C. diff. And I just about, pooped myself down the drain. And all of that got treated over this 3-year period.
Carl, you're a miracle. You're a miracle.
Well, the other miracle was I got hepatitis C back in the days when you had to have chemotherapy. And that put me in bed for a long time. Wow. So I love to see the sunshine. I love a good glass of water. I love to have a conversation like we're having, and writing books is as close as I'll ever get to heaven.
Carl, we all admire you. I'm going to ask you two final questions, and we're going to have two quick contests for door prizes, or I guess that's what we'd call them. But I'll ask you the questions now, I'll give you an opportunity to think about them. Well, I'll ask you one question now. The last one I'll ask you and not give you a chance to think about it. So the question I'll ask you now, I'll give you a chance to think about it. You've written 27 books. If you were to sit down today and say, I want to read one of my books of the 27, which of the 27 books would you pick, and why would you pick that? What would you read? So you think about that. We're going to have a contest. Two contests. Okay. This is the second contest. This is for the final hat, publication consultants with the label on it, old one, only 10 in the world. This is one of them. I'll send it to you if you win the drawing. So send me an email. Send the email to evan@publicationconsultants.com and just put on it hat drawing number 2, and we'll put your name in, draw it out. We'll send you a hat. The second drawing then is going to be for the final shirt, publication consultant shirt with the old label. Again, only 10 of them in the world. You may be the owner and wear this one. And so send us an email to evan@publicationconsultants.com and put on it shirt drawing number 2. Okay? And then if you're the winner, maybe you win them all. I don't know. So anyway, the draw of the luck. So Carl, if you was going to read one of your books, which one would it be?
Simplest answer to that is Gog and Magog. And the reason is I knew I was going to have to talk about the book, so I decided I ought to remember what's in it. I got started and I was trying to find little places that I might quote. And I decided, man, I like this book. So I just started at the beginning and I'm just reading it on through again. And I laugh and I cry and I am really enjoying it. Now, the other answer to that question is if I could only read one of my books ever again, then it would be the 6 books of the saga of a neurosurgeon. That is so real to me. It puts me back right in the scene, and I can remember that segment of my life vividly. So that's the answer.
Okay, Carl, thank you. One final question then. What are you working on now? What's your next book?
Well, it is entitled, and actually, incidentally, I'm just doing the fix up, paint up kind of things, but it's called The Rise and Fall of the 15th Caliphate. And then the subtitle is The CIA Giveth and the CIA Taketh Away, ... It is about ISIS, or the Islamic State, how we got to there. I can just tell you that there are 4 prologues which deal with how the CIA got us to the point where we got ISIS and got into that fight. And I think we'll probably do it again.
Yeah, Carl, thank you.
The next.
We look forward to your 28th book, Carl. And thank you for being here today. And thanks for those that have been here for their questions and for their comments. And thanks to everyone for being here today. We look forward to seeing you again on Readers and Writers Book Club. And in the meantime, keep in touch.